Subscribe to my YouTube channel, share it with your friends, and comment your thoughts. It was her worst nightmare, unfolding right before her eyes. Claudia Hartley stood frozen in the middle of the grandiose ballroom, the overwhelming echo of her heartbeat the only thing that seemed to exist in the space. The rich, velvet curtains adorned the windows, the sparkling chandeliers casting their golden light over the lavish affair. It should have been a night of celebration for her, a night she had dreamed about since childhood, walking among the elites, rubbing shoulders with the wealthy and the powerful. But instead, it was the night she would never forget. Claudia had been invited to this extravagant event by none other than the city's most prestigious socialite, Catherine Manning, the wife of billionaire financier, Thomas Manning. The invitation was exclusive, a rarity in itself, and Claudia's heart raced as she imagined the conversations she would have with people who were often mentioned in the headlines. However, the dream quickly turned into a nightmare when, just moments before the event started, Claudia found herself in the middle of a cruel joke, no, an act of humiliation. Claudia Hartley. The one who's been struggling to make ends meet at her humble little bookstore, Catherine's voice rang out across the room, dripping with sarcasm. You've been invited by me, but I'm afraid your presence here isn't quite fitting for our gathering tonight. I mean, who invited you? The room fell into a suffocating silence. The laughter, once a steady hum, died away. All eyes were on her. Claudia could feel their gazes burn into her skin, their judgment palpable. Her face flushed with heat, the sting of embarrassment sinking into her bones. She had been blindsided. Everyone had known her story. How she was the daughter of a failed entrepreneur, how she worked tirelessly to run her little bookstore, a small family business that couldn't seem to gain any real traction in the competitive market. But none of that mattered now. None of it mattered to Catherine. Claudia's stomach twisted in knots as Catherine smirked, clearly reveling in the moment. But I suppose if you're here to witness how the upper crust lives, go ahead. Just don't get too comfortable, Catherine said with a sneer, waving her hand dismissively. The moment felt surreal. Claudia wanted to disappear. She wanted to vanish, to undo the past few minutes. But the crowd around her remained still, staring with a mix of curiosity and condescension. As she stood there, her legs trembling beneath her, she could feel the weight of the humiliation press down on her chest. The feeling of rejection was suffocating. It wasn't just the cutting words, it was the way the whole room seemed to approve of Catherine's behavior. This was the elite, the untouchable ones, and Claudia, just a bookstore owner, was nothing but a mockery in their eyes. She should have left. Should have walked out, but something kept her standing there. Perhaps it was her pride, or perhaps it was the shock that kept her rooted to the spot. Either way, Claudia did not move. Then, as if sensing her discomfort, Catherine's voice cut through the silence again. Oh, come on, don't look so offended. It's just a little joke. Claudia felt her heart pound harder against her ribcage. Catherine was the embodiment of everything Claudia was not: wealth, power, and influence. Catherine could make or break anyone, simply with a word. It was clear that Claudia had never stood a chance in this world. But what happened next wasn't just about humiliation. It was about something much more dangerous, something far more unsettling. Just as Claudia turned to leave, her mind racing with all the emotions she couldn't fully process, a voice broke through the crowd, low and commanding. Catherine, that was uncalled for, the man's voice rumbled across the room. The crowd parted slightly, and for the first time in the entire evening, Claudia felt her breath catch in her throat. There, standing at the edge of the crowd, was Thomas Manning. His gaze was fixed on his wife, a disapproving frown etched into his face. He looked different. Intense. His usual cool demeanor was replaced by something deeper, something colder. Thomas? Catherine said, raising an eyebrow. What's the matter? It was just a bit of fun. This is not the time for your games, Thomas replied, his voice unwavering. He stood tall, his presence commanding the room. Claudia's pulse quickened. Could he see her? Could he hear her thoughts, her struggle, her desperate wish to simply leave without causing more of a scene? Thomas turned to her, his eyes meeting hers for the first time that night. The world seemed to slow as he locked his gaze onto her. There was something in his eyes, something like pity. But it wasn't pity in the usual sense. It wasn't the condescending kind of pity. It was as if, for a moment, he saw through the facade of the world she had been thrust into. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, he turned back to his wife. "I'm sorry," he said coldly, the words hanging in the air, the weight of them making the room feel even colder. The air around Claudia seemed to shift. She felt as though she was drowning in the intensity of the moment. But before she could gather herself enough to walk away, Catherine's voice rang out again, this time dripping with venom. "Don't get too comfortable, Claudia," Catherine said, her voice rising just enough to be heard by everyone. "You're not even close to belonging here." The world spun around Claudia as she stumbled back, heart racing, blood pounding in her ears. She had to get out. The laughter, the stares, the whispers, they all blurred together, making her head spin. She felt as though the walls were closing in on her. And then, without a word, Claudia turned and walked out of the room, her steps shaky but determined. The cold air of the evening seemed to slap her face as she exited into the night. She didn't know where to go or what to do. All she knew was that she couldn't stay there. But as she walked away from the ballroom, she couldn't shake the feeling that something about this night wasn't over. That the world of wealth and power would find a way to draw her back in. And she was right. Claudia spent the next few days in a haze, replaying the events of that fateful evening over and over in her mind. The humiliation she had felt lingered like an ache in her chest, refusing to subside. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Catherine's mocking smile, heard her cruel words echoing in the back of her mind. But as time passed, the sting of rejection began to dull, replaced by a burning question: why had Thomas Manning, of all people, stepped in to defend her? Was he truly concerned for her? Or was there something else at play? Despite herself, Claudia found her thoughts drifting back to the billionaire. Thomas Manning wasn't just wealthy, he was a symbol of everything Claudia had ever dreamed of. He was the man who could change her life in an instant. His influence reached far beyond the world of finance. He had power in politics, in business, and in every corner of the social elite. She had never imagined that someone like him would ever take notice of someone like her. But as she sat in her small apartment, the weight of her thoughts pressing down on her, something else unexpected happened. She heard a knock on her door. At first, Claudia thought it was just a neighbor, but when she opened the door, she was met with a courier holding an elegant envelope, sealed with a deep blue wax stamp. Her heart skipped a beat. The envelope had no return address, just her name written in bold, elegant script on the front. As she carefully opened it, her fingers trembled, unsure of what to expect. Inside was a simple card, printed with the same bold lettering. "You are cordially invited to a private event at the Manning estate. Please join us for an evening of celebration. Your presence is requested." Claudia stared at the card, her heart racing. An invitation? To the Manning estate? She couldn't believe it. Was this some sort of joke? Had Catherine planned this as a way to further humiliate her? But then, she remembered Thomas's words, the brief moment of kindness when he had defended her in front of the crowd. No, this was no joke. It had to be something more. With shaking hands, Claudia dialed the number at the bottom of the card. The voice on the other end was calm and professional, confirming that the invitation was genuine. "Your name has been added to the guest list for tomorrow evening," the voice informed her. "We look forward to your presence at the Manning estate." Before Claudia could gather her thoughts, the line went dead. She stood there, still holding the card in her hand, unable to comprehend what was happening. Was this her chance to redeem herself in front of the people who had looked down on her? Was Thomas Manning offering her a chance to prove herself? The next evening, she found herself standing outside the gates of the Manning estate, her breath catching in her throat as she gazed up at the massive mansion. It was a world so far removed from hers that it felt like a dream. Tall stone walls, meticulously manicured gardens, and the soft glow of lights pouring from the windows, all of it felt too extravagant to be real. A butler greeted her at the door and escorted her into the lavish interior of the estate. The mansion was everything she had imagined and more, opulent, grand, and intimidating in its perfection. The soft sounds of classical music filled the air as Claudia was led into a grand ballroom, where guests in exquisite evening attire mingled and sipped champagne. But it wasn't the guests who caught Claudia's attention. It was Thomas Manning. He stood across the room, talking to a group of people, his tall frame commanding attention. His dark suit looked flawless, his posture confident, his expression cool and controlled. And yet, when his eyes met hers from across the room, there was something in his gaze, something that made her feel as though he were searching for her, waiting for her to come closer. Claudia's heart skipped a beat as she hesitated in the doorway. What was she doing here? She wasn't supposed to be part of this world. She was just a small-town bookstore owner, barely scraping by. And yet, here she was, walking into the lion's den. As if sensing her uncertainty, Thomas's gaze softened, and he began to make his way toward her. The crowd seemed to part around him as he moved, his eyes never leaving hers. When he finally reached her, Claudia found herself struggling to breathe. "Claudia," he said, his voice low and smooth. "I'm glad you could make it. I wasn't sure if you would come." His words, simple as they were, struck her like a bolt of lightning. He had been expecting her. I didn't know what to expect," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know why I was invited." Thomas smiled, though it was a smile that seemed to carry a hint of mystery. "Not everything in this world makes sense at first, Claudia. But I think you'll find that some things happen for a reason." The way he said it, the way his gaze lingered on her, made her heart race even faster. Was there more to his invitation than she realized? Was this truly just a chance to redeem herself, or was there something more dangerous at play? Before she could ask him what he meant, Thomas leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Come with me," he said. "There's someone you need to meet." He led her through the crowd, past the opulent furnishings and the murmurs of the wealthy guests. Claudia couldn't shake the feeling that she was out of place. But Thomas seemed to be guiding her towards something, or someone. And she had no choice but to follow. They stopped in front of a large set of doors, which opened to reveal a private study. Inside, an older man sat behind a desk, his sharp eyes taking in the scene with a cool gaze. He looked like he belonged in this world, just as Thomas did. But his presence was different. There was an air of authority about him that made even Thomas seem somewhat small in comparison. "This is my father, Henry Manning," Thomas said, introducing the man. "He's the reason I wanted to speak with you." Claudia nodded politely, her heart pounding in her chest. Henry Manning? The patriarch of the Manning Empire? She had heard stories about him, about his ruthless business practices and his unyielding control over the family fortune. This was the man who had built the empire that Thomas now controlled. Henry's gaze never wavered as he studied her, his sharp eyes narrowing slightly. "So, you're the one who caught my son's attention," he said, his voice gravelly. "I have to admit, I'm curious about you, Claudia. You don't belong here, and yet, you're here." Claudia's throat tightened as she struggled to find the right words. She had no idea how to respond. This was not the conversation she had expected. "I didn't," she began, but Henry cut her off with a wave of his hand. "Don't be modest," he said, leaning back in his chair. "I'm not asking about your background, or your story. I'm asking why you think you belong here. Why Thomas brought you into this world, this life. Claudia froze. The question was direct, almost accusing. She had no idea how to answer. Before she could find her words, Thomas stepped forward. "Father," he said, his voice firm. "Claudia doesn't need to justify anything. She's here because I believe she deserves to be." Henry's gaze flickered briefly toward his son before settling back on Claudia. "I suppose we'll see about that, won't we?" he said, his voice cold and calculating. And just like that, the air in the room shifted. What had started as an invitation, a glimmer of hope, now felt like a trap, like a test that Claudia wasn't prepared for. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she couldn't shake the feeling that her presence here was no accident. The following days felt like a blur to Claudia. She couldn't escape the events of the Manning estate, no matter how hard she tried. Henry Manning's cryptic words haunted her, echoing in her mind as she went about her usual routine in the bookstore. What did he mean by, "we'll see about that"? Why had Thomas brought her there? She had hoped to find some answers, but instead, everything seemed more uncertain than ever. After that night at the estate, Claudia had returned to her apartment feeling more lost than ever. The gilded doors of the mansion, the whispers of the rich, and the cold, calculating gaze of Henry Manning seemed like a world far beyond her reach. She had no place there, yet something about Thomas Manning, the kindness he had shown her in the ballroom, the way he had defended her in front of everyone, kept pulling her back to the mansion. That night, Thomas called her. "Claudia," his voice was smooth, almost too smooth, as if he had rehearsed what he was about to say. "I need to speak with you. Can we meet?" Claudia hesitated. It had been nearly a week since the party, and she hadn't heard from him since. She had assumed he would simply forget about her, that she would fade into the background like all the other faces at the event. But his call proved otherwise. I'm not sure," Claudia replied, her voice shaking. "I don't know if I should. I don't belong in that world." "There's more to this than you realize," Thomas said, his tone softening. "Trust me. Please, just come." Something in his voice made her pause. Maybe it was the sincerity, or maybe it was the curiosity she couldn't shake, but Claudia found herself agreeing. They arranged to meet at a cafe in the city, a neutral location away from the grandeur of the Manning estate. When she arrived, Thomas was already there, sitting at a small table in the corner. He looked just as composed as ever, his dark suit impeccably tailored, his expression calm and collected. But Claudia noticed something else in his eyes, a hint of urgency, something that hadn't been there before. "Claudia," he greeted her with a smile, standing as she approached. "Thank you for coming." She nodded, sitting across from him. "I'm not sure what I'm doing here, Thomas. You've been so kind, but I don't understand why." "Why me? I'm just a bookstore owner. I don't belong in your world." Thomas leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady and intense. "That's exactly why I wanted to speak with you. You're not like the others. You don't play the same games. You're real, Claudia." His words sent a shiver down her spine. She had never considered herself anything special. She was just trying to get by, trying to make her small business work. But here was Thomas Manning, a billionaire, telling her that she was real, that she was something different. "I know what you're thinking," Thomas continued, his voice lowering. "You think this is all a game, that I'm just toying with you. But it's not like that. You've been chosen for something much bigger." Claudia blinked in surprise. "Chosen? For what?" Thomas hesitated, his eyes flickering as if he was unsure of how much to reveal. "There's a situation at home, a family matter. My father, Henry, he's not the man you think he is. He's playing a dangerous game, and I need someone I can trust to help me." Claudia stared at him, confused. "I don't understand. What do you mean? What's going on?" Thomas looked around the cafe, as though making sure no one was listening. Then, he leaned even closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's a business deal, one that my father is pushing through. It's going to ruin a lot of lives, Claudia. It's already started. People are being hurt, and I can't stop it. He has too much control." Claudia felt her heart race. The idea of getting involved in something so dangerous, something so high stakes, terrified her. She had never imagined her life could intersect with anything like this. But Thomas's words were compelling, his desperation palpable. "I need you to help me, Claudia," he continued, his gaze intense. "I need you to look into it, find out everything you can. My father trusts you, and you have access to places that I don't." Claudia felt a wave of uncertainty wash over her. She was just a woman with a small bookstore. What could she possibly do in this world of billionaires and power? But something deep inside her stirred. There was a fire in Thomas's eyes that she couldn't ignore, a plea for help that went beyond the surface. She didn't know why, but she felt compelled to help him. "I'll do what I can," Claudia said, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas gave a small nod, his expression softening. "I knew I could count on you." The days that followed were a whirlwind of confusion, secrecy, and fear. Claudia found herself delving deeper into the tangled web of the Manning empire, trying to uncover the truth behind the business deal that Thomas had mentioned. But with each step she took, the more dangerous it became. It started innocently enough. She began by researching the financial papers that were made available to the public, but soon she realized that the deal Thomas had spoken of was much bigger than she had imagined. It wasn't just about money, it was about control. Henry Manning had his hands in everything: media companies, pharmaceutical giants, real estate. Nothing was outside his reach. The deal in question involved an illegal merger between two major companies, and it was set to go through in just a matter of days. But Thomas had a plan to stop it, one that involved Claudia getting close to the key players in the deal. She had no idea what she was getting into. Each time she met with Thomas, he seemed to grow more distant, more secretive. His charm was still there, but there was a darkness behind his eyes, something that told her he was hiding something. Claudia began to feel like a pawn in a game that was much bigger than her, much bigger than she had ever anticipated. But it wasn't just the danger that scared her, it was the pull she felt toward Thomas. The way he looked at her, the way his touch lingered just a moment too long when they exchanged information. She could feel it growing between them, something that went beyond trust. It was attraction. And it terrified her. She knew that she shouldn't feel this way. She knew that he was a man wrapped in mystery, a man who had his own dark secrets. But every time she saw him, every time they spoke, she couldn't deny the chemistry between them. It wasn't until the night of the gala, a lavish event held at the Manning estate, that Claudia began to understand just how deep the deception ran. She had been invited, of course, but this time it wasn't by Thomas. It was by Henry, the man who had taken an interest in her from the very beginning. He had told her that he wanted to see her again, to discuss the progress she had made on the investigation. Claudia felt a chill run down her spine as she walked through the grand halls of the estate, a sense of dread hanging in the air. She had no idea what Henry wanted from her, but she was about to find out. Claudia had always believed she was in control of her life. She had worked hard to keep her small bookstore running, faced the ups and downs with determination, and learned to cope with rejection and failure. But nothing in her life had prepared her for the world she had been drawn into, the world of the Mannings. As the gala at the Manning estate unfolded, Claudia felt like she was stepping into a web she couldn't escape. Henry Manning's invitation had felt almost like a trap, and deep down, she knew it was. The cold, calculating glances he had given her in the past echoed in her mind as she stood at the grand entrance of his mansion. There was something off about him, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. When she entered the ballroom, the lavishness of it all almost overwhelmed her. The chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting a golden glow over the marble floors. The sound of soft classical music filled the room, but it did nothing to ease the tension that was growing inside her. She had been briefed by Thomas on what to expect. He had warned her that Henry would try to manipulate her, try to get her to reveal things she shouldn't. But he also told her to stay focused and keep her wits about her. This wasn't about playing games, it was about stopping Henry's dangerous business deal before it was too late. Claudia scanned the room, trying to spot Henry. The crowd was filled with the usual glittering elites, business tycoons, politicians, and celebrities, all talking and laughing like they had nothing in the world to worry about. But Claudia knew better. Beneath the polished exterior, something sinister was at play. Her eyes finally landed on him. Henry stood at the far side of the room, talking to a group of well-dressed individuals. His presence was commanding, his sharp features betraying no emotion as he spoke. Despite the fact that he was surrounded by people, Claudia couldn't help but feel like he was alone in the crowd, separate from everyone else. He exuded a sense of power, but there was a coldness in him that chilled her to the bone. As she made her way through the crowd, her heart thudded in her chest. She had no idea what Henry wanted from her, but she had a feeling it wasn't going to be good. When she finally reached him, he turned toward her with a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Claudia," Henry said, his voice smooth and low. "I'm glad you could make it. I wanted to speak with you, privately." Claudia's stomach tightened. She wasn't sure whether to trust him, but there was no turning back now. She followed him through the crowd and into a private study, a room that seemed to be a stark contrast to the opulence of the rest of the estate. It was dark and somber, filled with heavy furniture and dim lighting. Henry gestured for her to sit, and she did so reluctantly. The air felt thick with tension, as if the walls themselves were closing in on her. "I trust you've been doing your research, Claudia." Henry's voice was calm, almost too calm. "I'm sure Thomas has been filling your head with all sorts of things about my business practices." Claudia swallowed, her mind racing. She wasn't sure how much she should reveal. She had learned a lot in the past week about Henry's dealings, but she wasn't sure how much he knew she knew. "I've been looking into things," she said carefully, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm not sure I understand everything, but it doesn't look good." Henry's eyes narrowed slightly, as if testing her. "No, it doesn't look good, does it?" he said with a dry laugh. "But sometimes, you have to do things that don't look good to get what you want." Claudia felt a chill crawl down her spine. She didn't like where this was heading. "You see, Claudia," Henry continued, leaning forward in his chair, "Thomas is naive. He believes in a world where everything can be fixed with a handshake and a smile. But the truth is, the world doesn't work that way. There are powerful people, forces that control everything. You can either be a part of it, or you can get crushed underfoot." Claudia's mind raced. She knew Henry wasn't talking about just business anymore. He was talking about power, about control, and about the way the world worked at the top. It was a world she didn't understand, a world she wasn't sure she wanted to be a part of. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Henry leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving hers. "I want you to see the bigger picture. I want you to understand that Thomas is out of his depth. He's trying to stop something he doesn't even fully understand. The deal, the merger, it's already in motion. And stopping it? Well, that's not as simple as you might think." Claudia felt her heart race. Was this Henry's way of threatening her? Or was he trying to recruit her into his world? Either way, it didn't feel right. "I can't be a part of this," Claudia said, standing up. "I won't help you destroy people's lives for the sake of your empire." Henry's eyes darkened, and for the first time, Claudia saw a flicker of anger in his expression. "You don't understand, Claudia. You don't understand the sacrifices I've had to make to get where I am. This isn't just about money. It's about power. Control. And if you want to be part of it, you'll learn to make those sacrifices too. Claudia's heart pounded in her chest. She didn't know what Henry was capable of, but she knew he was dangerous. And she was beginning to realize that Thomas, despite his kindness, was just as much a part of this world as his father. "Leave now, Claudia," Henry said, his voice cold. "And think about what I've said. I'm sure you'll come around. You don't have a choice." Claudia turned and fled the room, her legs weak beneath her. The walls of the estate seemed to close in on her as she rushed back through the crowded ballroom. She didn't stop until she was outside, the cool night air hitting her face like a slap. She stood there, breathing heavily, trying to make sense of everything. What was happening? Who could she trust? But as she looked around, she felt the weight of Henry's words press down on her. She wasn't just involved in a simple business deal. This was bigger than that. This was a fight for power, a battle between father and son, and Claudia was caught in the middle. As she stood there, unsure of what to do next, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from Thomas. "Meet me. I need to tell you everything." Claudia's heart pounded as she stood in the middle of the darkened street outside the Manning estate. The weight of Henry's words still pressed down on her chest, suffocating her thoughts. She had never expected her life to spiral out of control like this. A small bookstore owner, drawn into the world of billionaires and power struggles, how had it all come to this? Her phone buzzed in her pocket again, this time with a new message from Thomas: "Meet me. I need to tell you everything." She read the message twice, trying to make sense of it. What could Thomas need to tell her that he hadn't already? Hadn't he already pulled her into this dangerous game? But something in the urgency of his words made her stomach twist. She needed answers. She needed to understand why he had brought her into this nightmare in the first place. With a shaky breath, she turned and made her way toward the car waiting at the curb. It was the same one that had brought her here earlier, a sleek black sedan with tinted windows. The driver didn't ask any questions, he just opened the door for her, and she slid into the back seat. The drive to Thomas's penthouse was eerily quiet. Claudia stared out the window, trying to gather her thoughts. The sprawling city lights blurred in the background, but she wasn't seeing them. She was lost in the whirlwind of emotions that had taken over her life in the past few weeks. Thomas had promised her the truth. But after everything that had happened, after the way Henry had manipulated her, after the secrets and lies, could she really trust him? Could she trust anyone in this world? The car finally came to a stop outside a high-rise building. Claudia's heart skipped a beat as she looked up at the towering structure. It was even more impressive in person. A gleaming monument of glass and steel, a world apart from. Monument of glass and steel, a world apart from the small bookstore she had once known. Thomas's penthouse was located on the top floor. When the elevator doors opened, Claudia was greeted by the familiar sleek design of the place, modern, polished, minimalist. But this time, there was no warmth to it. Everything felt cold, distant, and unsettling. Thomas stood by the window, looking out at the city below. His posture was rigid, his expression tense. He didn't turn to greet her as she entered. Instead, he stared out into the distance, lost in thought. "Thomas?" Claudia's voice was barely a whisper. He turned slowly, as if pulling himself out of a trance. His eyes were clouded with a mixture of regret and determination. "Claudia, I'm so sorry for all of this. I never wanted you to get involved in any of this. But I need you to understand the truth. You're in danger now, and I'm the one who brought you into it." Claudia felt a chill run down her spine. She stepped closer to him, her voice trembling. "What do you mean? What's going on, Thomas? What's happening?" Thomas sighed deeply and ran a hand through his hair. "I've been trying to protect you, but I've failed. My father, Henry, is trying to take control of everything. His business dealings are shady, illegal, even. The merger he's pushing through will not only destroy lives, but it will give him enough power to control this entire city. But that's not the worst of it. Claudia's pulse quickened. What's the worst of it? Thomas paused, his face shadowed with guilt. The worst part is, I'm not just trying to stop him. I'm trying to stop my father from doing something much darker. Something that involves you. Claudia's mind raced. What are you talking about? What does my involvement have to do with anything? Thomas took a deep breath. It was always the plan. My father knew that the only way to take full control was to make a marriage arrangement with someone who could unite the power of his empire with mine. He wanted me to marry someone who would give him access to everything, someone who could help him manipulate the system. And he chose you. Claudia's world tilted. Me? Why me? Because of your past, Thomas said quietly, as if the words themselves pained him. Your family's history. Your father's failed business ventures. Your bookstore, it's all part of the narrative. My father thought that if he could manipulate you into marrying me, it would solidify his power over both our worlds. You would be the bridge between our families, a way to bind us together. Claudia felt as though the ground had fallen out from beneath her. The truth hit her like a freight train. Henry had planned it all along. She had been a pawn in his game, just as Thomas had been. And now she was entangled in something far beyond her control. So, you knew this? You knew what your father wanted, she whispered, her voice breaking. I never agreed to it, Thomas said. His voice full of frustration. I never wanted to be part of his plan. But he's too powerful, Claudia. I've been fighting him for years, but he always wins. Every time I think I'm close to stopping him, he finds a way to crush me. And now he's using you to get to me. Claudia took a step back, her mind reeling. She couldn't process everything at once. She couldn't even begin to comprehend the magnitude of what Thomas was saying. But one thing was clear, she had been caught in a war that wasn't hers to fight. And the more she learned, the more dangerous it became. What happens now? She asked, her voice trembling. Thomas's eyes softened, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of vulnerability in him. I don't know, Claudia. I don't know how we stop this. I've tried everything, every legal means, every tactic I could think of, but my father always has one step ahead. And now, you're caught in the crossfire. She stood there, torn between the man who had defended her at the gala, the man who had made her feel seen, and the man whose father had now ensnared her in a game she didn't understand. What was she supposed to do? Then, the door slammed open behind them. Claudia turned, her heart skipping a beat. It was Henry. He strode into the room with his usual confident, controlled presence. His eyes flickered between Claudia and Thomas, the faintest hint of amusement dancing across his lips. Well, he said, his voice cool and collected. It seems we're finally getting to the heart of the matter. Claudia's stomach twisted. What are you doing here? I came to remind you of your place, Claudia, Henry replied, his voice laced with venom. You think you can just waltz into our world and start making decisions? Think again. You're a pawn in a much larger game, and you'll learn your place soon enough. Claudia's pulse quickened. She had no idea how Henry had known where they were, but it didn't matter now. She was trapped. They both were. I won't be your pawn, she said, her voice shaky but firm. I won't let you use me to destroy lives. Henry chuckled softly. Oh, Claudia. You already are my pawn. You just don't know it yet. With that, he turned and walked toward the door. You'll understand soon enough. The clock is ticking, and you're out of time. As the door slammed behind him, Claudia felt the walls close in. The web had become even more tangled, and now, she was at the center of it. She couldn't escape. And worse yet, the choices ahead of her were growing darker. Thomas turned to face her, his expression torn between guilt and resolve. "Claudia, I'm sorry. But now, we have no choice. We have to stop him. We have to stop my father." Claudia stood by the window, staring out at the city skyline that stretched before her. The lights twinkled in the distance, a stark contrast to the turmoil inside her. Thomas had left, telling her he had to make arrangements and that she should stay there, safe. But she didn't feel safe. She felt more trapped than ever. She had known, from the very beginning, that her life was about to change. But she hadn't expected it to spiral out of control this quickly. And now, she was caught between two forces, two powerful men, both claiming to protect her, both wanting to use her. The world she had once known, her quiet, modest life, seemed so far away now. She felt like an imposter in the mansion, playing a part in a story that wasn't hers. The events of the past few weeks played over and over in her mind: Henry's manipulation, Thomas's desperation, the way they had both used her. She had wanted to believe Thomas was different, that his desire to stop his father was pure. But now, as she stood in the penthouse, she wasn't so sure. The door creaked open behind her, and she turned to see Thomas standing in the doorway. He looked exhausted, his face drawn with the weight of the decisions he had to make. He had never looked more vulnerable, or more dangerous. "Claudia," he said quietly, his voice strained. "I didn't want you to get involved in any of this. But you're right in the middle of it now, and I don't know how to protect you anymore." She stepped back from the window, the words cutting through her like a knife. "What does that mean, Thomas? What exactly are you asking me to do?" Thomas took a step forward, his eyes searching hers for something, answers, maybe, or maybe forgiveness. "I'm asking you to trust me, Claudia. I'm asking you to believe that I'm trying to stop my father. But it's going to be difficult. He's not just a businessman, Claudia. He's a man who will stop at nothing to get what he wants. And right now, he wants you. He wants your power. He wants your family's history. He's going to use you to control everything." Claudia felt her chest tighten. She had suspected as much, but hearing it out loud made it more real. "So, you want me to be your pawn?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You want me to trust you and be part of your plan? After everything?" Thomas's face faltered, but he didn't look away. "No, Claudia. I don't want you to be a pawn. I never did. But the only way we can stop my father is if we take control of the situation. And right now, you're the key. Without you, he wins." Claudia's mind raced. She couldn't deny the truth in his words. But the truth was also suffocating. She wasn't a player in a game she understood. She wasn't sure she even wanted to play anymore. "I can't do this," she said softly, shaking her head. "I can't be part of this war. I'm just a woman trying to survive, Thomas. I never asked for any of this." "I know," Thomas replied, his voice raw with emotion. "I never wanted to drag you into this, but now it's too late. My father is coming for you, Claudia. And I won't let him destroy everything we've worked for." "Worked for?" Claudia repeated, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "You and your father have been playing this game for years, Thomas. And I'm just another piece on the board. You've both been using me. I was never a person to either of you. I was just a means to an end." Thomas flinched as if her words had struck him deeply. "That's not true," he said, his voice low. "I never wanted to use you. I wanted to protect you. But now I don't know what to do anymore." Claudia felt the weight of it all crash down on her. She didn't know who to trust. She didn't know if she could trust anyone anymore. Henry had made it clear that she was nothing but a tool to him, a way to solidify his power. And Thomas? She had wanted to believe that he was different, that he truly wanted to stop his father. But now, as she stood in front of him, she saw the truth. Thomas was just as caught in the game as his father was. The silence between them stretched for what felt like an eternity. And then, Claudia made her decision. "I won't be your pawn, Thomas. I won't let you use me," she said firmly, her voice steady. "I'll find my own way out of this. But I'm done with you. I'm done with all of this." Thomas's face fell, and for the first time, Claudia saw the desperation in his eyes. "Claudia, please, don't do this. You don't understand. I can't do this without you. I can't stop my father without you." "You're wrong," Claudia replied, her voice stronger than she'd ever felt. "You can stop him. But you have to do it on your own. I can't help you anymore." With that, Claudia turned and walked out of the penthouse. She didn't look back. Claudia's decision wasn't easy. She knew the risks. She knew the consequences. But for the first time since this nightmare had begun, she felt a sense of clarity. She couldn't let herself be used. She couldn't be part of a game she didn't understand. The next few days were a blur of frantic decision-making. Claudia knew that Henry would come after her, that he would try to manipulate her again. But this time, she was ready. She wasn't going to let him win. She wasn't going to let Thomas's war become hers. Claudia packed her things, took what little she could carry, and left the city. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew she had to leave. She had to get away from everything, the Mannings, the lies, the power games. She boarded a bus heading to the unknown, a place where she could start over. She didn't know what the future held, but she was determined to face it on her own terms. As the bus pulled away from the city, Claudia sat by the window, staring out at the fading skyline. She had made her choice. And while the road ahead was uncertain, she knew that it was hers to walk. In the end, Claudia learned the hardest lesson of all: sometimes, the greatest act of courage is walking away. She had been thrust into a world she didn't belong to, a world of manipulation, power, and deceit. But in the end, she refused to be a pawn. She chose freedom, even if it meant giving up everything she had once thought she wanted. Thomas and Henry might have thought they controlled her, but she had taken back the one thing they couldn't take from her, her own choices. And that was the greatest victory of all. End of story.